concerns. So I want to start pretty broadly here with just sort of defining what renewable energy is. So the United Nations actually defines renewable energy as sources of energy that are derived from natural sources and that are replenished at a higher rate than consumed. And I think this is a particularly good definition of renewable energy, especially when we think about it when compared to fossil fuels. So fossil fuels, that's what most of our energy comes from: coal, natural gas, and how the way that those are replenished, more or less, is just the way that the word is. So fossil fuels, so they come from millions and millions of years of fossil deposits, and then we actually extract the organic the carbon from those fossils. So that's not replenishing at a very high rate. And we're consuming fossil fuels much faster than they're replenishing themselves. So when we think of different types of renewable energy, things like solar or wind, those are typically renewing much more quickly than millions of years that fossil fuels require. So I want to just dig into a little bit of what are the different types of renewable energy that we have currently. So let's start with solar. So solar energy basically harnesses the power of the sun. And there's a couple of different ways we can do this, and I'll get into those details later. But the general idea with solar is that we take the heat from the sun, and that can generate electrons that then we can convert those electrons into energy that we use in our home. Another really important type of renewable energy is wind energy. So if you've ever driven through the wind belt, Montana, Iowa, you might see these huge wind turbines across the landscape. And essentially what's happening there is we have airflow that's going over these turbines, and it's turning a turbine that's going to ultimately be converted into electricity or power for generators. We also have tidal energy or wave energy. And tidal energy, it's a form of hydropower that essentially uses the natural movement of tides and waves to generate energy. Again, that natural movement can, in a way, start turning turbines. And then that can be put onto the grid for us to use. Geothermal energy, this is a type of energy that we don't use a whole lot in the United States. You're going to start hearing more about geothermal in the future as we're sort of developing out more forms of renewable energy in the US. But places like Iceland, for example, use geothermal energy a lot. So maybe you visited or seen photos of something like the Blue Lagoon. So that's basically a spring that stays warm all the time because of the geothermal heat produced by the Earth's core. So with geothermal energy, we're actually able to harness the center of the Earth to generate steam and heat to then convert that into power. Next, we have hydroelectric energy. This is basically dams. So many of you probably are aware of Hoover Dam out west. So Hoover Dam, essentially what we do with hydroelectric is we're damming up the water, and then we're able to sort of control the flow of that water when we need energy. And that water, we release the water to flow, and it goes over some turbines, and it turns those turbines, that goes into energy. A final type of renewable energy is biomass or bioenergy. And bioenergy is generated from organic matter like plants and animals and animal byproducts, so manure. And we can actually burn or gasify those products and convert that into heat, steam, turbines. So most renewable energy is sort of this process where we're harnessing some resource and making it turn a turbine for us. And the added bonus of renewables is that when we extract the resource, so the wind, the solar, and then we're converting it into energy, there's no harmful byproducts. So there's not a whole lot of carbon dioxide emissions like what we get with fossil fuels. So, we have the capacity, we have the technology, we have the ability to harness all of these different resources, basically from the sun to the center of the earth and everywhere in between, to give us that clean, carbon-free energy. But unfortunately, the United States doesn't really use that renewable energy as a primary source of energy. About 80% of US energy consumption is fossil fuel. And again, that fossil fuel is a huge contributor to climate change. When we burn fossil fuels, we release carbon dioxide, which is that greenhouse gas, and traps heat in our atmosphere. And so, really only up until 2018, 2019, about 20% of US energy consumption has been through renewables. Now, we're at a really important sort of point in history. We're at this sort of paradigm shift in the United States where we're starting to push away from fossil fuels, and we're starting to really encourage deployment of renewable energy. And in fact, the Biden and Harris administration has put forth a really ambitious goal of having 100% clean energy production by the year 2035. So again, it's the shift away from fossil fuels and using those renewable energy resources. Towards this goal, the administration has invested about $400 billion of investment through different legislation to get to this goal. And so, again, we have the ability, we have the technologies, the government is giving us a whole lot of encouragement to do this, it's giving us financial things to do. I mean, what would this even look like on the landscape if we were to actually get to that 100% clean energy by 2035? So there's been a lot of studies to show what that projected build out would look like. So on the left here, we have sort of what our current wind and solar footprint is. And sorry, these maps are a little bit duller than I would like them to be. But in the blue dots, you can see our wind, and that just represents where we have existing wind facilities today. In the orange represent our solar. So the orange is kind of difficult to see, especially on our current build out. But it's in the orange, mostly in the southeast and southwestern portions of the United States, where the sun shines the most and the brightest. So to be able to get to that net zero future, this is what we're going to have to see. So you can see we have a whole lot more wind resources going in, a lot more solar. We're way more orange on this map. And this map, or this projection, even includes offshore wind here. So all that being said, we actually do have the ability to get to that net zero within the next, this map is to 2050, but also to even do it quicker. So this is great, right? So we know that renewables lower our carbon emissions. We have the money, the incentive, and the capacity of land and technology to do it. So it's all sunshines and rainbows, right? Why didn't we do this a long time ago? Everything's perfect. It's not, right? So unfortunately, renewable energy has its own pitfalls. There's a lot of things that are in the con column of renewable energy. As much as we need it, and however important renewables are, it's not the magic pill that's going to solve everything and have no consequences. One of the biggest consequences and downsides to renewable energy is when it comes to wildlife and wildlands. We see a lot of bird and bat collisions. We see a lot of land being taken up by solar. We see animal movement being disrupted and animal behavior being disrupted by the presence of this renewable energy. So for the rest of this talk, I want to sort of go through some of the issues that we see, but I also don't want this to all be doom and gloom, right? Yes, there's issues, but we have been really creative in some of the ways to try to mitigate the issues that renewables pose to wildlife and wildlands. All right, so with that, let's start with talking about bats. We all know that bats are super important. They're pollinators, they disperse seeds, they're pests, they serve as pest control. They promote a lot of ecotourism. Think of Congress Avenue Bridge in Austin, Texas. Millions of people come to see these bats. And we even use them for our own scientific advancement. So the military studies how echolocation works to try to improve our military capacity. However, unfortunately, a lot of bats die at wind facilities as a result of collisions with the turbines. In fact, it's estimated that about 500,000 bats die at wind turbines every year in North America alone. One of the best studies, most cohesive studies where we have actual numbers showed that in 2003, somewhere between 1,300 and 4,000 bats were killed at one facility alone in West Virginia. So this is a really big problem. And we do have a lot of science behind it to tell us sort of what's going on. So we know that most bat fatalities in North America happen to migratory tree roosting species. So species like hoary bat, eastern red bat, silver-haired bats. And we know that they're happening typically during the migratory season, so late summer, early fall. And we see that these bats really do interact with these turbines. They'll fly right up to them, and most of these mortalities happen as they're getting caught up sort of in what's called the rotor swept zone. So the turbines turn around, they're actually getting hit by those turbines. But interestingly, we don't really know why the bats are going to the facility, right? So typically these facilities are in vast landscapes. What's bringing them to the wind facility, to the wind turbine itself? We don't really know. There's some hypotheses out there, including, these wind facilities have a lot of light that might attract insects. So maybe they're coming there to eat. Perhaps they're getting confused. They think that they're trees. So like I mentioned, most of the mortalities that occur are from tree roosting bats. So a big tall thing in the middle of the landscape looks a whole lot like a tree to a bat potentially, but obviously it's not a tree. So we don't really know why the bats are getting there or being attracted to the turbines, but maybe that's not super important at this point. What's more important is what can we do to actually reduce the mortality events that happen at these wind facilities? So I'm going to go through a couple of different things that we can do. The first things that have been developed are called deterrents, and deterrents are essentially a device that's attached to a wind turbine that emits a really loud or obnoxious voice or a sound that birds and bats don't like. So it is essentially, it's deterring the birds and bats from even coming near the wind turbine. So if they aren't near the turbine, they can't be hit by them. And so with bats, the deterrents typically emit a signal that interrupts echolocation, and for birds, it tends to emit a loud sound. And these deterrents seem to be relatively effective. This is an image from an energy company, NRG. It's the NRG bat deterrent system. And you can see here in green, this is sort of before the deterrent. And just to note, this is not at a wind facility. This is actually at a lake. So this sort of mirrory glass part, that's a lake, that's a water body. And all these green dots mark the flight path of a bat. And so you can see that, the bats are all over the place when the deterrent's off. This is just sort of natural behavior. When we turn the deterrent on, we get much less bat activity. So this is really compelling evidence that these deterrents really, really do work. Now, the downside with these is that they're still pretty new technologies. They don't always work. They only work with some species and not for others. And right now they're really expensive. So we don't see, sort of widespread use of these deterrents as of yet. Now, another thing that's done is what's called blanket curtailment. What curtailment means in the sense of wind facilities is turning the wind turbine off. So if we curtail it, we turn it off, then the bats cannot get hit by the turning of the blade. And what we know about bats is that the majority of strikes happen at lower wind speeds. So wind speeds below 6 meters per second, that's when we see most of the bat fatalities happening. So what if we just turn off the wind turbines whenever the wind is not blowing more than 6 meters per second? Well, what happens when we do that is we see a really significant decline in reduction in bat fatalities, up to 62% when we curtail or turn off the turbine when the wind speeds are at 5 meters per second. And if we curtail at 6.5 meters per second, so a slightly higher wind speed, we're seeing close to an 80% reduction in bat fatalities alone by just turning it off. All right, so why don't we just do that? Just turn it all off. Well, to be fair, if the wind turbine's not turning, it's not generating energy and it's not generating income. So operators are not very willing to just turn off at a lower wind speed and risk losing a lot of money. And the other downside about this is we're saying turn it off with blanket curtailment is saying you turn it off regardless of if the species is present. So turn it off if the wind speed is below 6.5 meters per second, but there might not even be a bat in the area. So then that also seems like a wasted effort and a potential loss of a lot of income. So there's some really smart people out there, and there's a sort of new and emerging form of curtailment called smart curtailment. And this is the idea that we can put detectors, excuse me, on the wind facility itself, on the wind turbine itself, that can actually detect the presence of a bat or a bird. And when there is a bird or bat present, then we can turn it down. We can turn the facilities off. So with bats, this Smart Mic 1 from Wildlife Acoustics, this can actually pick up different bat echolocation calls. And if there's a bat present, it essentially sends a signal to the wind turbine to turn off because we have the potential of striking. Another form of smart curtailment is a artificial intelligence camera, where it can actually detect if there's this is mostly for birds. So things like bald eagle and golden eagle tend to get struck down a lot. And so if the AI image says, okay, there's a bald eagle incoming, you can turn that off and minimize any risk to causing any mortality here. So this is, again, a sort of emerging technology. It is still really expensive, and it still has a lot of testing to be done, but it's a really, really promising thing that might happen to help minimize bird and bat impacts and mortalities at wind facilities. All right, let's turn our attention to solar and some of the issues with solar. So first and foremost, solar is one of the most rapidly growing energy sources being deployed in the United States, and it's a significant component to our net zero goals. So you might be hearing in the news about all these solar panel credits, tax credits that can go in. The government is putting a ton of eggs in the basket that is solar. However, yet again, there are some really serious wildlife issues that we need to be aware of and that need to be addressed for the solar build out to be done responsibly. I also want to note that there's two primary types of solar. The one that I'm showing you here, this is called photovoltaic or PV solar. This is probably what you're most familiar with. This is sort of what the rooftop panels are made out of. And what's happening here is when the sun hits these panels, there's a chemical reaction that can essentially generate electrons that can then go onto the grid for us to use. The other type of solar is called concentrated solar. These are essentially the panels are just mirrors, and the mirrors are concentrating the rays of the sun to a tower. So that's what this beam is here. And then it's heating it up. It's really, really hot. And that we also have, and then essentially there's water underneath this in barrels that the heat from the concentrated solar heats up that water, causes steam, turns a turbine. That's how concentrated solar works. Currently, there's only one functional concentrated solar facility. It's called Ivanpah. It's in the desert southwest of the United States. But there are a lot of wildlife issues when it comes to concentrated solar and PV solar. First and foremost, with concentrated solar, these facilities, the whole point of them is to concentrate the heat of the sun. So as you can imagine, they're very hot. So when a bird flies over them, even at altitude, it's so hot that these birds will actually singe. Their feathers will singe. The feathers will be no longer able to help the birds fly, and the birds perish. So this is a really big issue, that these birds are basically just singeing midair as they're flying over. Another issue that we have with solar that's under a lot of research right now is what we're calling is what's called the lake effect. And that's this idea that from above, a solar facility looks a whole lot like a lake. Let me show you. So this is a facility it's in Spain. And if you look at that from above, like, I don't blame the birds. That I would guess that's water. And so, these birds are going through often, areas that don't, like in the United States, the desert southwest, where there's not a lot of water bodies. So they might think that this is a water body, and they're actually flying right into them and colliding. So that's another big issue that's being studied. I also want to show you this photo because to show you just how quickly and rapidly deployment is happening with solar. So this, again, like I mentioned, is a facility in Western Spain owned by the Spanish electrical company Iberdrola. It's the largest PV facility plant in Europe, has over 1.4 million solar panels covering 4 square miles, and can supply energy to about 250,000 people a year. The crazy thing about this facility is that, number one, it's being built in relatively contiguous habitat, and it's fragmenting large forest patches on either side. Not only that, this is the satellite image in 2019, and this was it in 2020. This facility took 1 year to build. That's how quickly solar is happening on the landscape. And if we aren't smart about how we're doing it and building it, there can be serious consequences. So let's talk about sort of what happens on the habitat side of things. When you build a solar facility, it needs security. We need to keep people out. So they often construct these chain link fences. That's great. We don't want someone to sneak on, get hurt and electrocuted, or, you know, try to I don't know, cut the power off from this facility. So we do need these fences. But these fences don't just keep out humans, they also keep out wildlife that were previously using these areas. So there's been basically one study that's looked at this, the effects of this. This is from Hall Sawyer in 2022. And he looked at the effects of a solar facility being built on pronghorn in the western, on the I-80 corridor in the western United States. What we have here in purple is the pre-construction space use of these pronghorn, and that's represented in purple. So you can see where they're using, and then the dark black polygon here, that's where the solar facility was built. So this is sort of pre-construction space use. And then in orange here, we have the post-construction space use. So you can see that they're being completely excluded from the solar facility, where previously they completely used that area. Now they're being excluded. But not only that, they're changing the way that they're using the land, right? So we only saw just a little bit of space use in the southern portion. Now they're really starting to expand where they're using. So they're changing their behavior, and the consequences of this, we don't know the details of necessarily. But we do know that solar facilities are having an impact on these migrating ungulates and the way that they use the land. So what can we do about this? The sort of easiest thing we can do is have wildlife friendly fencing. So instead of having chain link, we can have sort of fencing with much larger gaps that smaller mammals can get through. We also see like gopher tortoises try to dig under chain link fences. They love solar facilities. It's just really great habitat for gopher tortoises. So if we actually just lift the fence up a little bit and give those gopher tortoises a little bit of space to dig under and burrow, they'll be less likely to get stuck. So, you know, these are relatively small modifications that you can make to make a facility more wildlife friendly. Another thing that is being encouraged a lot is, instead of having one big block of solar, is to break it up into smaller little blocks and maintain some habitat within those blocks so that we can maintain some sort of connectivity within the landscape. Another form of solar that's pretty clever is what's called photovoltaic. So remember, PV solar is photovoltaic. So they got clever and cheeky here, and it's called photovoltaics. But this is the idea of putting solar panels on water bodies. In India, they're actually using this pretty extensively and they're called solar canals. So they're building, we already have, or in India, they have canals built for agricultural reasons, and they're basically just building solar panels right over those canals. There's a lot of benefits to photovoltaics. Number one, it reduces and minimizes evaporation. In the case of the Indian solar canals, they actually provide local distributed energy to communities that otherwise wouldn't have the ability to have power because there's no transmission, basically. With cooler water, we have minimal algal blooms. And it actually, having cooler water underneath panels actually increases the efficiency by like 5%. I think every 2 degrees that a solar panel is kept cool, you get like a 2 to 3% increase in efficiency of those solar panels. So there's a lot of, potential benefits here. Some downsides to the photovoltaics include maintenance and keeping these panels clean, right? So if the panel right in the middle of this reservoir here is broken, it's really hard to fix that. Another possible issue is security. So again, sort of that whole health and human safety, but also the security of our energy is really important. Something else we can do to be responsible with our solar generation is having pollinator friendly solar. So we're seeing a big push for this, especially in the northeastern states, where essentially, we can build solar, and instead of just leaving, the ground bare by these solar facilities, let's actually plant native pollinator plants, and that can promote some pollinator habitat. Planting native plants is good for a whole host of reasons, but sort of if we're talking to an energy developer, we can say, hey, this will really help reduce your erosion. This will really help convince your farmers that you're trying to buy the land from to build the facility on. It'll help keep that soil nice and rich so that they can, after your 30-year lease is up, they can go back to farming. So there's a lot of potential benefits to pollinator-friendly solar. All right. Let's move on to the last type of energy source that I want to highlight today, and that's hydropower. And so again, hydropower is basically when we dam up a river and we control the flow of water, and we control that flow to go over turbines that turn and generate electricity. However, dams are not the best, right? So they change our waterscape quite significantly. This is the Parana River in Paraguay. And this is the natural flow. And then you can see that there was a dam that was constructed right here on the western portion of this satellite image. And it's completely changing the landscape. So we're getting floodplains where there didn't used to be floodplains, and it's completely altering the way the landscape is traditionally. This is an image that's actually a dam removal. So this was a dammed river, and they took that dam out. This was not a hydropower dam. So it's important to note that not every dam is a hydropower dam, but every hydropower dam is a dam. It doesn't work the other way, but you get my point. But essentially, they've removed this dam, and we have the natural flow, back to the natural flow of that water. So what do dams actually do to the ecosystem? This was I remember seeing this image in Biology 101, where it just sort of outlines sort of what a natural dynamic river ecosystem should look like and what it might look like after a dam. When we build a dam, we get a lot of sediment buildup sort of at the base of the dam, which makes the water more shallow. So that can heat up the water more quickly. It increases evaporation. But then from a wildlife perspective, we're impeding fish passage. The juvenile fish can't come downstream anymore to go out to the ocean, and the adult fish trying to reach spawning grounds can no longer get there when the dam is constructed. So fortunately, there's been a lot of really cool and kind of silly technologies to try to help maintain connectivity for fish. I think this is truly one of the most hilarious solutions, and it's been around since the 1930s. But the idea is that it's a fish ladder. And so you just build sort of a stepwise staircase for the fish to sort of just flop their way up and over the dam. There's some more advanced versions of these fish ladders, so more like fish escalators, where it actually moves the fish themselves, or you might have heard of fish being shot up and over dams. So there's all sorts of different things, and it tends to work. But there's a really, this is the idea of getting the fish up and over the turbines, because if they go through the dam and through the turbines, they'll obviously die in the turbines themselves. So there's this really cool new technology that's being developed by Natel Energy, where they're actually trying to build fish safe turbines. So that way we don't have to have these things to shoot fish over the dams or get them over the dams. And instead they can go right through the dam. So I'd like to share with you this quick video that I just think is incredibly cool to show you what the fish, what this fish safe turbine looked like.
The RHT is a high-performance hydro turbine designed to enable safe fish passage at low-head sites. In high-head hydropower facilities, fish injury from pressure and shear is common, but at low-head, blade strike and grinding are of primary concern. The thick, blunt leading edges of the RHT slow and deflect fish away from the dangerous leading edge zone during a strike. Natel Energy and Alden Research Lab have observed this effect in laboratory testing. In the RHT, the acute forward slant of the blade also reduces strike severity. Because blade velocity increases with radius, conventional straight turbine blades are most dangerous to fish near the tip. A steep slant in this region results in a safer, glancing blade contact. Finally, the RHT prevents grinding injury by minimizing gaps between stationary and moving components and has no converging features, which can cause serious injury to eels and other fish. These unique design features enable a survival rate greater than 99% for fish entrained in the RHT in many conditions, and enable the development of carbon-free baseload energy.
So it's a really clever solution to this issue, and there's a lot of really smart people out there working on a whole host of issues to try to solve a whole host of advancements to try to solve some of the issues that we're facing right now. So I want to end with just saying that we need renewables. Yes, they come with a lot of downsides, especially for wildlife and wild lands, but we cannot continue to be extracting and use and all of our energy coming from fossil fuels. We need renewables. It's part of the solution. We also obviously need wildlife, but these two things don't have to come in conflict of each other. We can think about putting renewables on the landscape in a smart, forward-thinking way that's going to promote and minimize wildlife conflict. We need technology and we need research advances so that turbine that I just showed you, like that's an incredible technological advancement that's going to really promote a lot of safe fish passage in the future. And really, we just need to have general care and consideration for our wildlife and our wild lands. And so with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Mark now to highlight some of how this connects to Project Wild. So thank you so much.
And thank you, Megan. I do see that we have a few questions in the question and answer section, and we'll come back to those in just a bit. But before we do, I want to share with you one of our Project Wild activities that is a great resource for learning and teaching about energy and the impact on the environment, on wildlife, and people. All right, and Megan, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see the shared screen? All right, thanks. So the activity I'm referring to is called the Power of Planning, and it is an activity in the Project Wild K-12 Curriculum and Activity Guide. We often refer to that as the terrestrial guide to distinguish it from the others, such as the Aquatic Wild Guide. And this guide is available, as you may know, to anyone who takes a Project Wild professional development training. You can contact your state Project Wild coordinator to learn more about those, or contact us at the national office, that is the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, and we can steer you in the right direction. We are also developing online courses for Project Wild. Currently, the Power of Planning is not in any of those. We are interested in educators' interest in all activities and how to get them. As I describe this, if you have questions about the activity or you want to contact me if you're interested in using it and need some suggestions or any other questions, I'll put my email address in the chat as we get closer to the questions and answers. So in the Power of Planning, I'm just kind of focusing in here on the first page to take a look at the objectives and the methods, but students are describing various impacts of various sources of energy production on the environment. And we're not just looking in this activity on renewable energy, we're looking across the board at renewable and non-renewable. And so, of course, historically, the burning, combustion of fuels, of fossil fuels, provide so much of our energy. And looking at the pros and cons across the board, and in the Project Wild manner, teaching the learners how to think, not what to think. And to do this, there's two main methods in this, and one main method is to create a concept map, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. The other method is to have students take a certain side or position and research it, and then have a friendly debate, hopefully a friendly debate about the pros and cons. For example, in a town council meeting type format. And so in this activity, the educator divides students up into groups. One group will be actually the town council members, and then you'll have other groups that will focus in on one type of energy. Maybe they work in that industry, or maybe they work for a nonprofit, but they research that. They get a page of information that comes right from the Project Wild guide and the Project Wild website, or they can dig deeper and learn more on their own and in their group about that type of energy, how it's generated, impacts on people, on the environment, on wildlife. And so this is an example of a group that might be assigned hydropower for their study, and they're going to ask, what are the impacts of hydropower energy production on the environment, on wildlife, and on people? And so as they break that down, they're going to, with the educator's help, and over a period of, well, it could go as long as the educator wants, but typically, a good hour to develop this concept map, and then keep coming back to it over the course of a week or a month, ideally, but really building out this concept map. And this is a very small portion of a larger concept map. But you can pick one thread, for example, at the top and ask, what are the impacts of hydropower energy production on, let's pick the environment. And the environment includes these various aspects, air, water, rivers, and you could add many others, right? And the impact on the environment, which includes rivers. And we know that we're going to brainstorm, well, what do rivers do? How does that affect these things? Well, rivers are funneled through dams down in the bottom left of the diagram. And dams can make, and following the arrow all the way around to the right, dams can make or generate electricity for people to use for lighting, heat, cooling, transport, agriculture. Okay, so in this process, we're helping students gather all their collective knowledge. We're looking at our assumptions. We're looking at areas where we need to research more. We're building questions to ask. We're going back later and maybe correcting our assumptions. And so each rectangle in this process represents a concept, and each arrow in this process represents a relationship. So the arrows can typically be labeled with a verb or a proposition, but words like on or takes or will make, a lot of action words there, process words. And so once you really get the concept map built out more over a longer period and you keep coming back to it, it might look something like this. This is an example of one about food production, and we're going to actually come back to this one next week. I hope you all tune in when we look at healthy soil and healthy ecosystems as part of our Project Wild Earth Day webinar series. And if you want detailed examples about how to do that hierarchical concept mapping with students, we can give that to you. You don't need the Project Wild guide. You can go to projectwild.org. And I'm going to come back to this slide in a second. But when you get there, you're going to look at the landing page, so you get a little piece of that on the left, but on the right side of the screen, you'll get to this page, and we have this page dedicated to the project wide activity, the power of planning. Every project wide activity has its own web page with a lot of resources. In this one, you'll find towards the top an example of a hierarchical concept map and instructions on how to develop that. So those are the documents you just saw, along with many others. Okay, I'm going to back up a bit. Oh, wrong direction. Hold on. Okay, so some of the questions student groups will be exploring as they're preparing for their city council meeting is the monetary cost of the production of that form of energy. What is the initial source of that energy? Is it from fossil fuels? Is it from the sun? Is it geothermal? How is it transported? Is it through pipes, on trucks, on trains? What are the pros and cons of that? What is the method of production? Okay, often, as Meaghan said, eventually it gets to the point, almost always, where we're turning a turbine to generate electricity, right? In the case of fossil fuels, we're burning them or combustion in engines like cars. So a lot of different methods for producing power. What are the positive and negative impacts on the environment? What are the positive and negative impacts on wildlife? And what are the positive and negative impacts on humans? This process is a good example of where the educator, and certainly not the student, need to be an expert in the topic, but it's a framework for helping explore with a group the bigger topic and where to go next and how to put our thoughts together. And then students come together for their town council meeting, advocating for their particular energy source. And whereas the town council members, the students who get that role, they're not going to have as much time to research each of those, but they're going to research a little bit on all of them and hear the presentations. They'll take their vote and create a plan for how their town will proceed with their energy development. All right, so I'm going to pause and we're going to circle back now to questions. So I have opened the question and answer queue here. And one of the questions, and Meaghan, I think these will typically be addressed to you, but the first one is, I'm going to go with is, what are the impacts of wildlife on photovoltaics?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the answer is we don't know. So photovoltaics isn't super widely used right now. So there hasn't been a ton of research on it, right? Most of the research that's happened has just been, is it possible? Can we do it? But if you think of something like a pond turtle, for example, it might, if we're covering up the whole area, now it might have less areas for it to come up for air. Also, usually in a photovoltaic area, we need to keep it clean and free of debris. So like logs and stuff that might be in a pond that the little turtle could come up and bask on may no longer exist. That's fully hypothetical because we really just don't know. So that's a really unsatisfying answer, but that's what we've got.
Well, this is a great opportunity for me to jump in and say, what a great question that students might ask. And, as in my previous role as a teacher, I wouldn't know the answer to that, but how can we find out, right? So let's put it on our concept map. Let's see what's out there that we can find. Let's brainstorm on what they might be, more shade, for example. What else about it? And so I think such a question is a great opportunity for helping us decide how to guide our learning. I'm going to go up with the next question here. You had talked about the gopher tortoise and their attraction to sites such as solar sites. And the question is, what is attracting the gopher tortoise to the area?
Yeah, so it's a good question. And I think in the talk I said that the gopher tortoises love these areas. And it's not necessarily that they're attracted to the solar facility for any particular way. It's more that the solar facilities are being built in areas that gopher tortoises live. So gopher tortoises are typically in these really open areas. They're in the southeastern portion of the United States where there's a ton of solar resources. And so there just happens to be gopher tortoises. And so the interesting thing about gopher tortoises is they're super philopatric. So they like to be where their home is. So if a developer is building a solar facility, they'll be required by the Georgia Department of Natural Resources, for example, to relocate those gopher tortoises. And what we found is that if you relocate them, they'll try to come right back. They like to be where their home is. So that's really why we're seeing it, is because they're just trying to get back to where they were, like they were there first. So what Georgia DNR is doing right now, if they're being relocated, they do have to be sort of contained for a certain amount of time for them to establish a territory in their new home.
Okay. Well, here's another question, changing gears a bit. What job titles would students look for to research and create wildlife-friendly technologies to complement green jobs?
Wow, what a great question. So I'm not the best person to ask. So my background is not in energy. I've never worked in energy before. So I have a research science background. I got my PhD working on salamanders in the Smoky Mountains. And this job just happened to come across, and it sounded super, super interesting to me. And I'm doing this work. And again, I didn't even know that this sort of job happened. So at state agencies, if you're interested in working for a state agency, many state agencies have energy liaisons or an energy coordinator. So these are people who are going to be reviewing energy projects, and sort of evaluating them for how much conflict is there that might arise with this energy project that you're proposing. When it comes to sort of like the research and development side of things, that's what you're looking for is research and development. So you can look at for PhD programs, you can look for different research organizations, you can look at sort of like the Natel Energy, that's a company whose sole focus is to develop these conflict free or less conflict hydro turbines. And so there's companies out there that are, maybe it's like a startup company, but really you're for a job title, looking for something like renewable energy specialist or renewable energy and wildlife, or you can kind of go a whole lot of different ways. It's a really good question. And I think in the next 10 years, we're going to see a lot more of these jobs coming up, because this is becoming a really, really big issue, especially with all of the sort of build out that we're going to be seeing. So I suspect, just kind of keep your ears to the ground and be looking for things like renewable energy specialist or things of that like.
I know I've done a bit of research on jobs in state wildlife agencies, and some do employ, engineers for various purposes, but whether they do or not, they all rely on the work of engineers and designers for advancing green technologies. But they also rely on hundreds of other professions for helping implement those green technologies. And what I think is really cool is those hundreds of different professions come together through this common purpose and cause. In my home state of Texas Parks and Wildlife has maybe 100 different kinds of jobs, different titles. There's people in infrastructure who need to know about what the latest green technologies are. So as they're fixing dams or building roads or putting in solar, what have you, they need to know from the people who are designing those. And there's educators, and there's biologists, and there's administrative workers and human resource people. And so part of that answer might be is helping the learner become aware of their passions and their values and their interests, and then exploring a number of occupations within there. Okay.
Mark, if I could expand a little bit on that, I showed you when I was talking about the smart curtailment systems, there was a picture of the wildlife acoustics. That technology was developed by a former agency biologist who saw a need, and he was an engineer and he was a bat biologist, and he realized that he might be able to build something that could really help. So it can always come organically too, and as if you can just chase your passions.
Okay. I was wondering this one, are the blades of the wind turbines shut down once a bird or bat is detected?
Yeah, so in those smart curtailment systems, that's the idea, is if they're detected by the AI or by the sound, we shut it down. So so I sort of was trying to draw the contrast between a blanket curtailment where we shut it down no matter what, if the wind speed is below a certain speed, versus smart. So with a blanket, we shut it down no matter what, whether or not a species is present. But with smart curtailment, we're only shutting it down if a species is present. So that's the idea behind it. Again, there's still a lot of development that needs to happen with that technology. But yes, short answer.
Okay. And Meaghan, related to that, is there any similar approach with concentrated solar where the facility can be turned off if there's a detection? Yeah,
so there's no way to like turn concentrated solar off. So I if the question is there a deterrent? So like, let's just keep them away rather than shutting down the energy. There is some research that's trying to do that. And that's like all I really know about it. But with concentrated solar, sorry, I had an answer and then it just lost me. Are the same deterrents in the wind turbine facility used for concentrated? Oh, so deterrents, so most of these birds are flying at altitude, and these deterrents, they don't have a very large range. So the ones that have been developed, you can only send that deterrent like maybe 20 meters away from the facility itself. And so a lot of times when birds are flying over, they're actually flying at higher altitudes than I think a deterrent would be able to reach with the existing technology. So it's possible, but at this point, it's no.
There was a question about collapsed lungs, and Are
any syndrome of collapsed lungs for birds? I'm not sure I know what that question is asking. Did we lose Mark or did we lose me?
Oh, Mark might be frozen.
Okay.
So Jeannie, if you can elaborate on your question in the chat at all, that would be helpful. But maybe while Jeannie's doing that, somebody else had said that, oh, well, it was Jeannie who said that she belongs to the Delaware River Shad Fishermen's Association, and the shad do not use the ladders. They're afraid of them. So some, it's you had alluded to that in the very beginning, that there is no panacea. There's no one fix that we have for everything.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. I don't know if Jeannie is still on the call or can type in the chat. Yeah, here we go.
Isn't there a chance that or a change in pressure that actually collapses the lung? Yeah, so that's a hypothesis. So in reference to, I assume you're talking about sort of the wind turbines, there's a difference in pressure sort of in front of the wind turbine and behind the turbine, it's like a barometric pressure difference. And there's been some thought that that's causing a lot of fatality, but there's actually no evidence to suggest that that's true. That was just a hypothesis that existed for, and it still might be a hypothesis, but as to date, there's no evidence to suggest that there's any barometric pressure that actually affects in a negative way the birds and bats.
We are coming up at the top of the hour. Meaghan, I want to thank you for your time. I learned so much. And I think the other thing is I realized I had a lot of misconceptions about some of these alternative energy options. And so I really do appreciate your time here. Everyone that's still with us, thank you for attending. And we will get this recording posted to the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies YouTube channel. Please join us next week as we have Kalina Wadaway talking about soils and how that impacts wildlife. All right, so thanks everyone. Have a great day, and we'll see you next week.